Hello, everyone. I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21 and Info Voices, and this is one of our regular webinars. And today we've got Melanie Smith with us. Now, Melanie is a person who has found herself involved in a very frantic campaign to try and prevent the deportation of one of her church members. And we're going to talk to her about that and how it all happened, what the process is that she went through, the sort of emotional upheaval for the person concerned and for her and all those who were involved. And I think it's a very important and tragic story. And it's a story about lack of humanity and humanity as well to try and rectify the situation. So Melanie, thank you for being with us today, and that's really great to have you here. But maybe we could start by maybe you just telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do. But when they see you, they'll be pretty clear what you do.
Yes. As long as you're not listening to sound only, you'll be able to see that I'm wearing a clerical collar. I am a minister in the United Reformed Church, one of the mainstream denominations in the United Kingdom, and I look after 3 churches here in Enfield, one in Palmer's Green, one in Winchmore Hill, and one over at Ponders End. And that involves everything from leading the services on a Sunday to try and make links with the community and join with community in a common voice for bringing together people in this area for good and just and right causes.
Okay, so you're in a church, and we're going to talk about Madhi, who's the person facing deportation, possibly back to Germany. Now, how did you first come across Madhi? How did it all happen?
Well, for me, I first came across Madhi back in September of last year. He and his partner started to come to my church. They started to come to my church in Winchmore Hill because Madhi is a Christian. He's from Iran. I think we're all aware that being a Christian in Iran is not a good or healthy thing to be. It is in fact illegal to talk about your Christianity in any way. And so when he got to the UK, he wanted to find a church. When he moved to Enfield to be with his partner Ian, Ian had good friends at our church, and so they started to come along and join in our fellowship at Winchmore Hill United Reformed Church.
So, when he was in Iran originally, I gather he was tortured at least twice. Was that because he was a Christian and because he was gay, or was there any other reason that you know of?
It's a complicated story, and I think that the main reason that Madhi faced discrimination in Iran was because of his Christianity. He didn't really come out as gay until a little bit later. But he had spent a little bit of time in about 2010 in Turkey, where he came across some Christians. He had his own spiritual experience, and then on his return to Iran, he started to talk about Jesus, who he sees as his saviour. That brought him to the attention of the authorities, and twice he was taken into detention in Iran. The torture was as much psychological as it was physical, sleep deprivation being the main one, with not allowing him to go to sleep at night, keeping the cell door banging open and shut, lights on and off, that kind of thing. By the time you've been taken into detention twice in Iran, there's no sense that it would be a third time lucky. So his family helped him to leave Iran.
So when he did leave Iran, when he fled, he went to Germany, didn't he? And he didn't always have a particularly good time there either, did he? Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, going to Germany, particularly good time. I don't think it could have been particularly much worse. On leaving Iran, a country where homosexuality isn't really spoken about, I think that actually did give him a little bit of freedom to start to think about who he was in terms of himself. And so in Germany, in some ways, it was where he started to come out. But when he arrived in Germany in early 2016, you'll remember that that was really at the height of the humanitarian refugee crisis that we saw across Central Europe at that time. The German authorities looked at his asylum claim very quickly, and very much like happens in the UK. So there's not much difference, that a first claim for asylum is usually denied. It is very, very rare for anybody, even if they're accepted later down the line, for a first asylum claim to be accepted. But what this meant for Madhi is that he ended up having to leave his accommodation, his shared accommodation that he was in Germany, and started living on the streets. At that point, whereas in Iran, the persecution was for him being Christian, by the time he got to Germany, the fact that he was a gay Iranian brought him to the attention of a far-right youth group, not organised, but they were young people and they obviously had far-right beliefs, and they picked on him relentlessly, night after night, sometimes kicking him and sometimes doing other things, which I have to say I don't feel comfortable talking about it at this time of the morning when other people could be listening in, children basically. So he was very, very damaged by that experience, didn't feel any more safe there. And I think at this point it's only fair for us to remember the horrific attack overnight in Germany, where 8 people were targeted and killed by a far-right extremist. And it seems hollow to say our thoughts and prayers go out to them at this stage. Of course they do, but this is not just a tragedy, it's a crime against humanity. But it also goes to underline why Madhi has a real fear of being in Germany. During his times in Iran and Germany, Madhi did develop depression, anxiety, and since coming to the UK, he has been diagnosed with PTSD. So his fears of going back to Germany or Iran for him are debilitating. And so we've got huge concerns about his time in Germany as well as we have in Iran.
So when he was in Germany, he faced this discrimination and by far-right groups, and he came to the UK. How did he come to the UK? Why was it the UK he got to? And what was the process? Who helped him get here?
So there is the sense that the UK is a fair and just place. For decades, we have been declaring that we have the rule of law and that we are welcoming and that we honour and respect asylum seekers. So knowing that Germany hadn't treated him well, he was recommended to come to the UK, and he did that by a small boat across the Channel, where immediately he declared himself to the British authorities. It was one of these dangerous journeys in a very small boat that really wasn't seaworthy. So we're very, very grateful that that wasn't the end of the tragedy at that point. Border officials took him into the custody and then placed him up in Liverpool for processing and for registration purposes.
So eventually he went to the Colnbrook detention centre, didn't he? And I gather when he was there, he was quite brutally treated as well. I mean, I guess you know about that, and maybe you could tell us.
Yeah. So not long after arriving in Liverpool, he actually met somebody online, a Facebook romance, which is still flourishing person to person. And Madhi moved down to Enfield with a local man here. And then late last August, Madhi had been suffering from his mental health condition, and he was told that he didn't need to go and register on his bail conditions that asylum seekers have to do as a matter of the course here, and that's fine. But he was told he didn't have to because of his health condition. Unfortunately, the Home Office didn't receive the notes, couldn't find the notes, and so they broke down the door early one morning and took him to detention at Colnbrook. at that time, the legal options had not all been filed, but the government policy effectively is to refuse one legal argument and then try to remove the person. So they booked him on a flight back to Germany because that was his point of entry into Europe. Madhi, that morning, when he heard he was going back, he actually had a blade and he did try to end his own life. He was found, he was bandaged, but wearing only his underpants covered in blood and with a towel put around him for decency, not even his own clothes. He was very physically moved to Heathrow and put on a plane. Obviously, the Home Office would claim that reasonable force was used. There is a sense that this is a mentally unstable man who had just tried to take his own life, and they effectively knocked him to the ground, restrained him and forced him into the van and onto the flight, at which point, when he arrived in Germany, Germany saw the physical and mental state that he was in and felt that they could not take responsibility for him at that stage, and told the British authorities that they had to take him back and care for him, that they wouldn't accept somebody who had been obviously so maltreated. So he was returned to the UK and then released on bail for another few months.
I mean, detention centres are quite a sort of controversial issue. And I mean, has your experience of looking at his detainment in a detention centre brought you to the view that they're not the most humane places in the world?
I think also the language we use is really interested in this. Detention centres, they are fully secure prisons. They look like a prison, they act like a prison, they are a prison. Madhi has committed no crime other than wanting to be safe. And for that to be put in prison with all the restrictions on what you can do, who you can associate with, is well, it's punishing people for the fact that they have come to this country on the premise that we are a safe and humane country and have promised to take care of people. It's a perverse situation to be in. In fairness, when I visited Madhi at the detention centre, there were a lot of people that smiled, were quite pleasant to us. They didn't mistreat us. The visitors' room wasn't altogether unpleasant, other than, I think, a very well thought out picture of the Tower of London on the wall, which I'm not sure quite what that says to people staying in a detention centre. But there was still, they were prison guards. They couldn't speak quite openly to you. They stated very clearly to me that Madhi would struggle there because he was gay, and that he would be subject to having to look after himself very, very carefully, and having to be watched by the staff very, very carefully, because being gay in detention, in prison, is not a safe place to be in itself.
Okay, so you went through all this, and you obviously had communication with the Home Office. Did they at any point give you the grounds why his application was refused, or was there a deadly silence?
Well, there's been two big periods of detention. So the first one, where he was taken back to Germany and that refused, was late last summer, beginning of late autumn. More recently, he was taken into detention again because he was advised that he didn't need to sign on, and then he did, and so they came to detain him and try and fly him out again. And we're very grateful to the local MP, Ferial Clark from Enfield North, who intervened and managed to get those flights suspended. And now I can't remember exactly what your question was, Francis. I beg your pardon.
Well, sometimes I can never remember what my question was either. But the question was, I mean, what was the reason the Home Office gave for his refusal, or did they not tell you at all?
They do give reasons. They said that his relationship with his partner was not genuine, which to anybody who knows them knows completely how ridiculous that is. It is a fully genuine relationship. They care for each other very much. They are in love with each other, and they have a strong relationship even though they've only been together for less than a year. And I think of my parents that got married after just knowing each other for 3 months and are still together with each other 40 years later. So I've got no concerns about the strength of their relationship. They're a lovely partnership together. They also claim that Madhi will be completely safe in Germany. And technically, I don't know how much less safe Germany is for a gay Christian asylum seeker who is suffering from PTSD than England is in some respects. But I do know is that Madhi's mental health is so fragile. His fear of going back to Germany, because the very appalling treatment he received out there means that for him, return to Germany is the ending of his life. When we went to the bail hearing near Heathrow at the end of January to try and secure his release, because we didn't feel that all the legal arguments had been looked at properly, his last words to the Home Office official and to the judge as he was being taken back into detention were, "I will not be leaving this country alive."
Oh dear.
And well, they are final words. He is terrified of going back to Germany.
Do you think because he said that's one of the reasons why originally, as I understand it anyhow, he wasn't granted bail?
The last refusal for bail was actually on a technicality. We ended up having to withdraw our application for bail in the court because there had been a second flight booked out for him after we'd managed to get the first flight cancelled. It's all very technical and all very complicated. And if there is a flight booked, then actually you will never be granted bail. So we had to withdraw that application for bail. However, once we had managed to get that second flight in January cancelled, again through Ferial Clark's intervention, we were there in the situation whereby it is against common practice, and indeed I think it's against the law to be able to hold somebody in detention who is either a victim of torture, and there is a medical report on file to say that Madhi has been a victim of torture, and it's also illegal to hold somebody with severe mental health issues. So at that point, a couple of weeks ago, he was released back to be with his partner here safely in Enfield. However, since that time, another application, another submission to the courts that he should stay here was again rejected. It was turned around extremely quickly, which was a surprise to us all, which meant that yesterday, Wednesday, he should have had to go and sign on. But to go and sign on would have almost certainly meant that he'd have been detained again, because we feel that the Home Office would have booked another flight. As I say, as soon as one legal channel has been rejected, the Home Office put you on another flight to try and get you out as quickly as possible. The concern, the worry for this was so bad that an ambulance was called for Madhi on Monday morning. He was assessed and is now a resident at Chase Farm Hospital here in Enfield, and we are aware that they are looking for a relatively long stay for him, that his mental health is that fragile, and they're so concerned about his suicidal tendency.
In your discussions with the Home Office and your contacts, did you get a sense of frustration in having to deal with them? Did you get a feeling there was still a culture of hostility, or were they very open with you?
This is going to sound bizarre. I have not been able to speak to the Home Office. I have had not one conversation with them. At one point, after sending in the petition at that point with over 37,000 signatures on it, it's now well over 39,000. I just got a standard reply saying, we will respond to you within 20 days. Given the fact that it was less than 20 days that he was already booked on a flight to go out, that wasn't exactly a satisfactory answer. They have then done a more substantive reply, which effectively says, we don't talk to individuals about other people's cases. The Home Office have spoken to the MP and the MP's assistant, and they do speak to the solicitor, but they follow a tick box procedure, and they follow a copy and paste procedure. So the latest rejection that we received at 5:30 on Friday evening did actually say that we see no reason why you cannot be returned to Iraq. It also said that we see no reason why you and your son will be safe on return. Mehdi doesn't have a son. And so that the Home Office, when they say they have carefully considered the application, show no care in the response that they give, and the flagrant disregard for trying to look at this as an individual case and not just cutting and pasting refusals from somebody else is unspeakable. I appreciate that the Home Office are busy, but this is somebody's life we're talking about. It is just not acceptable to cut and paste from somebody else's papers in a refusal, which means that somebody is effectively consigned to either exceptionally mental ill health problems, or where he may feel he needs to end his own life.
So, you know, your contact with the Home Office really showed that they hadn't carefully considered it at all, really. It was a tick box intervention, as you said. You mentioned a petition. You've actually started a campaign. Is the petition been the main part of it? You mentioned Contact Imperial Clark, who was his MP, and she did some great work. But have you worked with just a petition, or have you been working with refugee organisations as well to try and resolve this?
We've reached out to many people. I'm certainly not alone in the work that's been done. In fact, I don't want to name check at the moment because there are so many people who have done so much. We have been in touch with various different refugee organisations. Ferrell has been great. People on Enfield Voices have been fabulous and suggesting things. The petition has been particularly good in people being able to suggest other things to try. We've needed, sadly, also to start a fundraiser because legal fees do not come cheaply at all. And people have been great and generous with that. We've been trying, I think, everything that we can to raise a profile. We've had online articles in the Huffington Post, in the Metro. We've appeared online and in print in the United Reformed Churches magazines, in the Church of England's Church Times, Gay Times, or Pink News. And I've also been on local radio, on BBC Radio Essex as it happens, and now here. So we're reaching out for help, for people with expertise, for advice, for support. And during that process, not that we ever suspected that we were alone, but there have been many people who have contacted us who have gone through not the same experience, but very, very similar experiences of being turned down by the Home Office. So the petition has been a great way to reach out and share.
Yeah. Well, you've obviously done a lot. You've been central to this sort of campaign, and it must have created a lot of strain and stress for you. And obviously not as much as Madhi, but for you. But in one sense, despite his tragedy, he's lucky in one point. He's had you and he's had other people. Now, there must be some people going through similar situations who have no advocate. I mean, those are really tragic, aren't they?
Well, they are. And I think that this has been interesting because there are people... The subject of asylum seekers, the subject of refugees, is something that I've been involved with through my work back in Southend when I was the minister there. I've been involved with Enfield Refugee Welcome here. I've a little bit support for Care for Calais, other organisations, and I talk about it. I preach about it on a Sunday morning. I occasionally share posts on Facebook. I try to raise these issues quite often in community. But what has really alarmed me is, and I'm not criticising my little church at Winchmore Hill at all, but despite all of that and me trying to raise awareness of it, it wasn't until Madhi was taken away from them that they had any idea that this happens. And people just do not know what happens. They've got no idea of the reality. And it's them that are now saying to me, my goodness, how do we raise a profile of what's happening? How can we do more to help? Because how many other people are going through this without people to support them? So there's a real sense that there are people who, because they're touched personally about it, feel that they have to do more about it. So I'm not suggesting that we're going to suddenly solve the problem, but all of a sudden I've got many people who are ready to try and reach out and help more people in these situations. But Madhi really is the tip of an iceberg. There are many people with really good grounds to be granted asylum, a safe place in this country, but the Home Office, as we've said, are trying to fulfil quotas, are trying to live up to the expectation that the government have put on them to basically say that we don't want migration, and that people without a voice, without support, are easy targets to get rid of, so that the government are able to say, yes, we managed to solve this problem. There were this many of people that came to the country. They didn't have a good reason to stay here, even though the case hadn't been fully heard. And so we can send them back. They're an easy way of making a hit to say they're fulfilling their election promises.
Okay, well, I mean, clearly he's got your support and you've got the support now of a lot of people, and that is really great. I mean, if you'd like to speculate, what do you think the future holds for Madhi?
We wouldn't be doing any of this if we felt it was a lost cause. I would not be expecting other people to spend their time on it or even give financially if I felt that we were just pouring time down the drain, money down the drain. And therefore, we have got to go forward on faith and confidence and say we will get this sorted. We know that Madhi has got a really good reason to stay here. We know that actually the country will benefit from his staying here. He doesn't cost us anything at the moment because his partner Madhi has got a status which means he doesn't get any money from the government. So he's living here free of charge, other than his medical care. Certainly his medical care, because of his status as a victim of torture, there are many charities that will pay for that. So it's not even that we're asking the NHS to cover that eventually. And he is qualified as a sports therapist. So he'll be able to work and help others in the community. He'll be nothing other than a good member of society who will be working for others and with others. And so that is what's going to happen. We're going to make sure that the Home Office realise that not only has he a good case for asylum, he has a good case for asylum here, and that actually he will benefit Enfield and the country as a whole and become a great taxpayer, and pay all his taxes on time, and benefit the whole of society.
Well, I guess when you're in a campaign like you are, you have to be an optimist. We sort of come to the end of our 30 minutes now, but do you want to tell us finally, if anybody wanted to get involved in the campaign, to help in any way, to get in touch with you, where do they go? What do they do?
The easiest way is to look on the website change.org and then type in the word Madhi, Madhi. So just in a search engine, just type in change.org and the word Madhi, Madhi, and read through that, support the petition if you're able to. Also, there are a series of updates. The latest couple of updates have got ways of supporting financially, and if you feel that you could offer advice or other links to other organisations, you can put comments on that petition and I can be in touch. I follow that very regularly and do try and follow up on those comments when I can.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I've seen your updates on change.org, so I know you work very hard in informing people what the latest situation is. So that's fantastic. I mean, you know, that's a great interview. It's a tragic situation you're in, but you've done so much work and the people around you have done so much work that it's great to see what might be, hopefully, a positive outcome. And I'm sure Madhi is really grateful for all the help he's got, and despite his mental health problems, it's made it less worse than it would have been had you not been there. So thank you for doing this.
Can I just say one final word? When the petition had reached 35,000 signatures and he was in detention in Colnbrook, he said to his partner, "Does that mean that I have to bake 35,000 cakes to thank them all?"
and of course you said yes. But anyhow, yeah, it'd be interesting to see if he does, but that's a lot of people on the petition, and that's really good. Well, thank you again, Melanie, for doing that and for what you're doing generally, and you know, for being who you are. So thank you. And you know, we've come to the end of the interview, so we'll end this interview now.